Góða kvöldið og velkomin. I'm going to speak in English because this program was advertised in English and will be in English. It's a program about Katrín Sigurðardóttir at the Met. I think I don't need to introduce Katrín much to this group. She is an artist who has been working in New York and Reykjavík for many years. She studied at myndlist- og handíðaskólinn and then went to New York for graduate studies, studied at the Rutgers University in New Jersey, and has lived in these two cities and worked ever since. She had exhibitions here at the Listasafn Reykjavíkur in the year 2000, and here in Hafnarhús, a major installation in 2004. An installation, I think, that is important to the topic in this evening. And she had a wonderful exhibition at the National Gallery a couple of years ago. And we are very fortunate to have the curator who worked with Katrín at the Met, Anne L. Strauss, who is an associate curator in the Department of 19th Century Modern and Contemporary Art at the Metropolitan Museum, where she has spent most of her career. She has worked with major artists, of course, who have shown there, contemporary artists. She is one of a minority of curators at the Metropolitan Museum who work with living artists. I think you probably all know the Metropolitan Museum of Art very well, and if you've been in New York, I expect that you have, I certainly hope that you've been there. It is the most venerable museum in the United States. I think it is to the States what the Louvre is to Europe. Incredible collection. I studied art history in the United States, and in every period of art history, you go to the Metropolitan Museum to see the world art. It has a collection in Egyptian, classical, Greek and Roman art, Asian, African, Oceanic, a major collection in medieval art that is housed in a separate building called the Cloister, and of course Renaissance and so forth and so on, decorative art, European painting and sculpture, and a very interesting and noted program of contemporary art installations on the roof and inside the building also. I mentioned this about the Metropolitan Museum just to give a context or some sense of the context in which this exhibition appeared. I was looking at some numbers today, and I found out that the Metropolitan Museum is 190,000 square feet. Can that be? I figured it out with the aid of a calculator that we could fit 136 Kjarvalsstaðir inside the building. So, some 2 million works in the collection. And this is the context. So Anne is going to start telling us a little bit about the program, and then Katrín is going to talk about her installation. And after that, we are going to sit down here and have a discussion, with all of you rather than just among ourselves.
Thank you very much, Hafþór. And I just wanted to say what an honor and a privilege it is to be here this evening and in Iceland for a first time that came about through the invitation of the Reykjavík Art Museum, and a particular thank you to Hafþór Ingvason and to Kristen Dagmar, and also to Katrin, who initiated this invitation when we were collaborating together at the museum some time ago. So I'm going to introduce the exhibition series at the Metropolitan Museum, where Katrin's installations became the most recent part of. Katrin's was the 7th in the series of exhibitions featuring contemporary artists at mid-career in the museum's modern and contemporary mezzanine level art galleries. And the series was initiated in 2005 and increasingly has featured artists who engage with the Metropolitan Museum institutionally, with its collections, and with art history in general. Artists invited to work with us are asked to think about the museum and art history and come up with something specific, not just the space alone, but to the encyclopedic spirit of the place, which displays under its roof art dating back more than 5,000 years. So I will just briefly present the artist exhibitions that preceded Katrin's, and then we'll discuss her work in greater depth. So the first exhibition in the series was Tony Oursler at the Met with 2 installations that were titled Studio and Climaxed. And this took place between May and September of 2005. Tony Oursler is an American artist. He was born in 1954, and he lives and works in New York. In his first installation that you see at the top, which was called Studio, 7 Months of My Aesthetic Education Plus Some, this was a work that was inspired by Gustave Courbet's famous work in the Musée d'Orsay in Paris that is entitled The Artist's Studio, a real allegory of a 7-year phase in my artistic and moral life, and it was from 1855. And what Tony did was he created his own 3-dimensional studio, identical in scale to Courbet's monumental painting. So he was looking back at the 19th century for inspiration in his own thoroughly modern interpretation. It was a mixed media installation that playfully reinterpreted Courbet's studio, and he brought in what he called studio visitors who made an appearance on a screen that you see hanging down in the center. And there were also collaborations from studio assistants of his, friends, and his painter wife, Jacqueline Humphreys. He represents himself in the studio with that green blob-like form in the center. It was a sort of a glowing blob on which there were video projections of multiple eyes. He wanted to put himself in the work as opposed to what Courbet did. Courbet is depicted in his painting with his back to the audience, but Oursler said, I want to be in the work, the picture space, and looking out to the viewer and the participant. In the second piece, which was in an adjacent gallery called Climaxed, he created this environmental installation featuring an animated fireball. And this figure, which again is the artist's face, was booming out in a sculpture that was in a state of continual explosion. The next in the series was Carol Walker at the Met. The title of the piece was After the Deluge. This exhibition was inspired by Hurricane Katrina, and it explored the theme of After a Deluge with works by artists throughout the ages. Carol Walker is an African-American artist born in 1969, and she's widely represented for her explorations of issues of race, gender, sexuality through the 18th century medium of cut paper silhouettes. That's her medium. And in this case, she borrowed a variety of objects from the museum's holdings. So she really mined the museum's collection, and she requested specific objects that then were lent to it as she explored, in her words, the banality of everyday life, water, and its impact. She borrowed works from the American wing, from African art, drawings and paints, drawings and prints, and she featured her own work as well. Neo Rauch was the third artist in this series. German artist born in 1960 in Leipzig, and he presented a new series of paintings specifically for the exhibition. His experience of growing up in East Germany shapes his work, and his paintings sort of teeter between surrealism and social realism, and they really defy easy interpretation. You're drawn into scenes of strange beings and ambiguous landscapes in this palette that's quite distinctive in its bright acidic colors. The next in the series was Tara Donovan. She was the fourth from November 2007 to September 2008. American artist living and working in New York. She presented a large-scale wall-mounted silver mylar tape installation that was made specifically for that site. Her work was a massive accumulation of these metallic loops that both reflect and refract light, and they take on the phenomenon of a geological formation or a landscape or an atmospheric condition. She works in a very labor-intensive method and through meticulous craftsmanship transforms a daily object. In this case, she was working with tape. Sometimes she works with styrofoam cups or toothpicks or drinking straws, and amassing millions and millions and millions of that same form then transforms a banal environment into something very subtle and sublime through abstract forms. Raqib Shaw was the fifth in the series from November 2008 to March 2009, and it was his first solo museum exhibition in New York. Raqib Shaw is born in 1974 and is an Indian, London-based artist. And this show was his response to an exhibition that had been at Tate Britain called Holbein in England that took place in 2006 to 2007. And he drew on the oeuvre of the German artist Hans Holbein the Younger, whose dates were 1497 to 1543, and was the first Western painter that Shaw had looked at when he moved to London. And he in that exhibition was really reverently copying Holbein's portraits, but embellishing them with a very dramatic exploration with the medium in which he works. He works with enamel and jewel-like glitter and gemstones. There were a number of prints by Holbein that he borrowed from the Met's print department, and there was a second series of works in this show that showed fantastic creatures juxtaposed with architectural renderings against a backdrop of a world falling into ruin. Pablo Bronstein was the sixth in the series and was the artist's first solo exhibition in New York. And this took place between October 2009 to April 2010. He was born in Argentina in 1977 and now lives and works in London. And his new work for this exhibition addressed the history and future of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in his mind. There were several large ink drawings by the artist that suggested a mythical history of the museum, imagining the museum under construction some centuries ago. And there was also a series of computer drawings that focused on the hypothetical future of the museum. So this brings us now to Katrin's exhibition, which is the seventh in the series, and featured two new sculptural installations created specifically for the Metropolitan Museum by Katrin. And with this project on view from October 2010 to June 2011, we extended it. Originally it was going to have a shorter run, but it was deemed so popular and something we wanted to keep that we extended it. And ultimately, in fact, we purchased for the museum's permanent collection the work that you see on the right. So that was an extraordinary outcome of a very successful project. The starting point was in spring or summer of 2008, following a visit that I'd made to Katrin's studio in New York, and was followed up by the museum's invitation for her to submit a proposal for the show. She spent extended periods of time at the museum as she developed her proposal, and as an artist known for her highly detailed renditions of places, both real and fictional, she eventually settled on 2 18th century French period rooms from the museum's collection as sources for inspiration. Entitled Boiserie, which is French for wood paneling, Katrin's installations were full-scale interpretations of 2 rooms. This is the first one I'm showing you, which is the Hôtel de Crillon. Its dates are 1777 to 1780, and this is paneling from that house that was on the Place de la Concorde in Paris. This paneling once lined a multi-paneled boudoir, which was located next to the bedroom of the 5th Duke d'Aumont in his private mansion on the Place de la Concorde. And then the other period room that Katrin was looking at was the Hôtel de Cabris room, which dates from 1774 at Grasse in Provence. And this paneling was commissioned in Paris, and then ultimately became the paneling for the Marquis de Cabris and his wife in Grasse. And both of Katrin's Boiserie installations invited the viewer to become an active participant. And we find increasingly in our department that our visitors in particular are very engaged in work in which they can participate. Katrin developed several proposals in response to the Met's period rooms. She was looking at Roman rooms that we had, these 2 and more, Rococo and neoclassical European rooms. She looked at the American wing, and in the end we were torn about which proposal, I'll just go back, which proposal to select. And our department chairman, Gary Tinterow, weighed in, as did other curators from departments whose holdings she was looking at. And in the end, in January 2010, we selected 2 of them because we were so torn, and decided on these 2 for displays, which we felt made a particularly compelling pair and presented Katrin's work in greater scope than had we just chosen 1. And then we scheduled the exhibition to open that fall in October 2010, allowing for her to fabricate the works. We found Katrin to be a remarkable and poetic artist, and we couldn't have been more pleased at the outcome of working with her. She unfailingly produces exquisite crafted works of art, and which really provokes intriguing and often long-lasting responses to viewers. She was looking at works in our collection that are there on permanent display, period rooms, and she was addressing how a viewer engages with those works. And there were many, many fascinating aspects that came into play, which she'll talk about when she's going to now talk about her work, and we can all engage in that conversation as well.
Gott kvöld. I'm going to speak in English. I'm very happy to see all of you, and very thankful to the Reykjavík Art Museum for inviting Anne and me to come and talk about this project. I'm going to just sort of continue from where Anne left off. Basically, like Anne said, we worked we considered several different proposals. It's a very incredibly special opportunity to get to have an opportunity to make an interpretation in a place like the Metropolitan Museum, where there are so many things that speak to me. I guess I just would like to give a little bit of an introduction sort of to how I came up with these ideas. I usually in my work try to reflect upon the relationship between the viewer and the artwork, and I feel like I've sort of done that in most of the work that I've done in the last maybe 10 or 15 years, and somehow shed a light on this sort of simultaneous wonder and problem that is posed to the viewer in front of a work of art within the framework of the institution, be it the museum, be it a gallery, or any other type of show space. And I think, to me, this narrative is implicit in my work, even if I am seemingly working with something that is more overt, or something that is more topical to something more specific. So when I was given an opportunity to make and show my work within the context of the Metropolitan Museum, it was almost went without saying that I would take my cues from the collection itself. So within that parameter, the selection of these two rooms was quite instinctual. Like Anne mentioned, we came up with several different proposals, and then sort of as a collaboration with Anne and Gary and a few other curators in the museum, there was a discussion about which of these proposals would be appropriate, and there the decision is made to select these two period rooms, which are both French and both from the 18th century. I think what originally drew me to the period rooms in the museum, rather than say a painting or a costume, is that the period rooms present a place or represent a place. I should also say something about the title of the works. Boiserie is like Anne mentioned. It's a word that, it's a word that means a wood paneling, and I think it's very interesting to think of. A period room is most often this sort of thin skin that is taken from within a structure, and we think of it as an actual place or an actual room, but really it's just the skin that kind of is on top of the structure of the walls. I tend to be fascinated with scenography in many different forms in my work, and scenography is very much exactly this. It's not architecture as a structure of a house. It's not. It's more sort of akin to a painting. It's an illusionistic surface that then represents a place that in some ways is not actually there. So that's why I was interested in copying meticulously the boiseries that represented these rooms in the museum. So, and I'm interested in what happens when the wooden paneling that delineated these 18th century places is removed from its original location and time and reinstalled in a different country, different century for a different purpose, and how the definition of place, space, and location is all put to question somehow through that. Are we granted a magical peek into the 18th century France, or are we looking at the museum itself and the mosaic experience that is framed by the boiserie of these French rooms? Anyway, so that was a little sort of something to say before we actually look at the images here. So this is from the Creon Room, and here's an image from the Cabris. And I wanted to include this image because you see a person there with a camera in the mirror, and so this was basically what I was doing a lot of in December, January of 2009, 2010, going into these rooms and taking lots of photos and then sort of trying to piece the rooms together, trying to survey and create, sort of trace up the designs of the room for the work that I then made. Sort of around the same time, I was honing these maquettes, which I very often work with miniatures, but these were actually maquettes that are made specifically to represent the idea of these large works. And I was very happy when the work eventually was complete and installed, that I felt that the maquettes actually made a very good representation of the work that later came to be. And here is again more, once we had decided upon the space where this work was to be placed, I made yet another maquette. And then this is a maquette of the Creon Room with the actual samples of the actual mirror that is then used in the full-scale piece, as you can see here. And again, it's just so wonderful to see what can be done with miniatures. That's something that maybe doesn't surprise anyone, that something I'm fascinated with. We began so I would say that the period of time from maybe January 2010 up until April 2010, I was taking photos, working on the maquettes, and sort of piecing the designs together. And then in middle of May 2010, we just kind of delved into the production, and that's when things really shifted gears and got very, very, very involved with several people who were sort of working on this. And the Cabris room, the way we fabricated it was basically, I had digital drawings basically translated for a machine. It's called the CNC machine, which is I don't know exactly how that translates, but it's a router that is controlled by a computer. So you can work with very complex designs in a relatively, it's a very efficient way to work. But also I was interested in working with a process that was sort of not handmade, but that would be sort of a machined process, you could say. And this was all cut out of MDF. And I was going for sort of a flat, almost a little bit of a plastic look, or plastic, not in plastic sort of in the old original meaning of that word. And here's another image from the production. This was really, I mean, this piece was really a puzzle in a lot of different ways. Each of these panels, they had to fit together in a certain order, and each of the panels were generally layered in 3 layers, and the layers had to fit on top, and then, you know, they all had to be hinged together. And, you know, I just think that Brian Cronin, who fabricated this for me, is an absolute genius to have been able to somehow understand what I wanted and make it happen. The other room, the Creon Room, was, as often happens, you know, in the process, there are decisions that are made, and then these decisions become very sort of inherent and important for the, you know, for the meaning of the work and for the outcome of the work. And originally, much of that room was also meant to be fabricated with the assistance of a computer. But as I sort of started working on it, I realized that I really needed to do the work entirely by hand. And these are just some carvings that were made. I worked with a team of, basically a team of 2 incredibly skilled antique restorers. And one of them was a master wood carver who basically sat for, I would say, good 3 months and carved ornaments. And some of them we then, you know, would then cast and reproduce in several copies. This is Mr. Neil, Mordecai Neil, who was the person who helped me with making this incredible furniture. And I can just admit that, you know, I really knew nothing about reproducing antiques when I started this process, and he knew a lot more, and his knowledge, I think, had a lot to do with how the project turned out and with a lot of the sort of aesthetic decisions that ended up being made. So this is a chair that is in the Creon Room, which originally comes from, correct me if I'm wrong, but it comes from the court of Marie Antoinette. And on top of it, you kind of can't see it, but on top of it is the insignia of Marie Antoinette. So it was just like being in some, you know, fairy tale, in a sense, to be working with these objects. I mean, it's unbelievably wonderful to get to study them and have an opportunity to work with them. We decided that the best thing to do would be to just get an upholsterer to work with us in the studio rather than sending the work out to be upholstered. And so I had a very happy sort of companionship with this gentleman in my studio for a few weeks. So the Cabris room was all fabricated off-site, meaning not in my studio, but the Creon room, there were so many of us working on it at the same time, and the work was just being sort of pieced together from so many different angles. There was the antique restorers, there was the upholsterer, and so we just needed to have the piece in my studio and just piece it together one by one. You can see here on the top, there's this white frame up there. This some of the carved sort of ornamental, you can see it also here on the side, some of the ornamental molding was maybe we carved a piece about this big and then we reproduced it and made it into these larger strips. None of these were methods that I had ever used before, and I learned a great deal from doing this, and it was all enjoyable, I have to say. And then here you can see, once the room had been complete, it kind of broke down into modules and was brought from the studio, and here the next image is of the work being reassembled at the museum. And then came the opening, and the work was complete, which was, as I'm sure, all of you know here in this room who make art, there's this shift kind of going out of the world of making the work and then having to stop and looking at it. So that was, of course, as always, took a bit of time to shift over into just realizing that this phase of production was over and now the work was done. And so maybe I can just say a few more. This is, now you're actually looking at the work as it is complete. As you can probably see, those of you that have possibly seen the work that I did here in 2004, there's a great kinship or a connection with the installation that I did here at this museum. And both of the works I wanted to sort of elaborate on or work further on perhaps themes or ideas that I had worked on in other installations. I felt that, I did not want to kind of start with a completely new, a new approach. I wanted to take maybe something that I had worked on previously and somehow appropriate that or put that in context with the collection of the museum. I've been asked the question, why are both of the rooms white? And why are they not? Both of the actual rooms are very beautifully colored arabesque paintings or gilding, and I wanted to sort of relate these two works to the contemporary show space, maybe to the sort of the idea of the white cube, bring them into contemporaneity through the usage of the white color. Here you see this is looking through a door which is in full scale, and here is looking through a door which is about maybe less than, it's probably about 60 centimeters tall or so. And it's wonderful to photograph this piece because the scales are, ever changing, and you can just kind of play a lot with the camera in terms of what you can make happen. And again, sort of akin to scenography and to the way these panels, this boiserie actually works. It's thin, it's very two-sided. One side reveals the illusion of the, actually it's actually not right, because this boiserie is as it is in the museum, it's not representing anything except itself, but still maybe relating it to the idea of the painting. This surface that represents something illusory, and then the backside is more just showing how this illusion is created. And so the smallest panels are about 5% scale of the original panels. And something that I think is kind of a miracle is that the piece, these tiny little components are placed directly on the floor, and I can't remember how many thousands of people went through these spaces, and after the show closed, they were still intact and not damaged, and nobody seemed to, not see them, which was great. So these are the smallest panels. Scale here is about this, so what's this, 30 centimeters high or so? Here you see a little bit of a human scale reference, although this is also very sort of elusive because the camera actually makes these panels here in the front much larger than they actually are in relation to the figure. And this is then the Creon Room, which was in the north gallery. Has had a little more circumference than it did in my studio, obviously. And I also have been asked about the usage of the mirrors and how I came up with this, this particular juxtaposition of the mirrors and how they reflected each other. And basically, I didn't really do anything except copy the original design of the architect the best I could. And the French in the 18th century were real masters with this sort of placement of mirrors. And so the only thing that I really did was the only tweak that I made here is to make the mirrors be of surveillance glass that you can look through them. So the perspectives that people see into this room are very different from anything that anyone that might have, through different periods, visited the room would have seen. And so here you see the back of the chair that you saw in production in the earlier images. This is the interior seen through one of the windows. It was really quite delightful to reproduce this room. It's such a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful room. Every inch of this room is just delightful. And that's, I guess, my last image. See the daybed from the court of Marie Antoinette in its white, the white version. And I guess that's all I prepared to say today, so thank you. I think originally I planned to make the room just maybe a little bit more like a room like this would be produced, say, for a theater set, something like that. But working with these, people who actually recreate furniture, actual functional furniture, meant that sort of the direction that was taken was to do everything pretty much the way it would be done for functional furniture. So the carving probably was much more complete than it really needed to be for the sort of appearance of the room, which I actually loved, because then I feel that the work sort of has even more integrity and it's more in line with how this room was and how this furniture was originally produced. So it's more of a sort of like an homage to these craftsmen. And but everything was so all the furniture was completely functional. You could sit in these chairs and be very comfortable in them, but I actually, as far as I know, nobody has ever sat in them, because the fabric that is used to cover is so delicate. It was very, very difficult to select just the right white and just the right sort of texture of fabric that would have the right sort of luminosity in the room. But you asked about the carving and the casting. So sometimes, and I think this is the way I think it's been done for a long time, is that sometimes when you have say a pattern that is reoccurring, I think for probably, I mean, somebody else could probably answer this better than me, but I think for hundreds of years it's been customary to make negatives and then cast them. So a lot of usually when there is a reoccurring motif, then it's usually reproduced through casting, plaster casting. And I did most of I actually did all of the plaster casting myself. That was my sort of handcraft in the project.
And it was just especially impressive, the detail that Katrin was obsessing about, and her drive to really replicate that interior and those furnishings for that one room. And in the other, it was all digitally machined, and it was all using cutting-edge technological methodology. And so it was between these two pieces, there was a wonderful dialogue that was inherent in the piece, and there was a wonderful conversation. So you had one piece that you could not enter into and was all handcrafted, and the other piece you could enter into and was all digitally machined. So it was, and these two spaces were separated by one additional gallery, so you had an opportunity to experience the two, but walking through a separate space that gave you sort of a little distance to be in. So it was a marvelous pairing of these two installations by one artist exploring it in great detail.
How close was this installation to the actual period rooms?
Oh, exceptionally close, but it was pared down. It was those environments distilled, and the materials that Katrin used basically came down to MDF and wood and white paint, mirror, and then the upholstered, the components that went into upholstered furnishings. But it was through her very detailed recording of the rooms that made it exact, but then it was her contemporary interpretation of those spaces.
Would people see both as they walked down the floor?
They did, yes. We prepared a map so that people, because in the text panels we talked about those period rooms that we were up on the mezzanine level of our modern and contemporary spaces, and the European sculpture and decorative arts are in an adjacent space one floor away. So the text panels described where these pieces were, but we wanted people to go and see them, and it's a large place, the museum is, and people are forever getting lost. So we devised a map on a card that people could take, and people did go and they wanted to see what the rooms were that led to this construction. So they definitely followed the map.
I'd like to ask about the time in your work. Your work always, often is site-specific and often replicates an actual space, often in quite detail, like your landscapes. But seems somehow that there is time in them, that there's a frozen time or a reference. Can you tell us anything about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think whenever you work with architecture, there is always a reference to time. And I mean, in these pieces, certainly, I mean, these time is probably more sort of present in this work than probably in almost anything else maybe not. I mean, now that I think about it, I can think of several works, like you said, that have that reference. I mean, I just think, and I mean, this is, I guess, a sort of a philosophical idea. You know, how can you take time and space apart? It's not possible. You can't talk of a location or a place without. There's no place without time. I mean, you don't. Geography doesn't exist without time. Time is always part of the equation. Now, I mean, some of the work, not this project in particular, but some of the work that I've done doesn't refer to a specific location, or is perhaps something that is a conglomerate of several different places, and then then the idea of time becomes more complex. But I mean, this project, is very is somehow completely, even if it seems to be about physical space, this physical space is completely cued to a certain period, and the period that this late 18th century France. I mean, I have gotten the question if this is. If I somehow was making some sort of reference or to, say, the Enlightenment or the French Revolution, and I didn't select these rooms or select this period specifically or consciously to make a point. But I think that I'm interested. Obviously, I sort of enjoy that interpretation, and. I mean, I think I was more sort of trying to go for selecting places that represented a certain sort of golden age or opulence that you are sort of observe as a voyeur or as a viewer, but you're not really part of.
Just follow up on that with more about time and no time and space and no space and non-sight, perhaps. There you take the form of a period room that has been transported from one place to another. It has perhaps some association with the work of natural history, natural museum diagrams,
yeah.
And Smithson, perhaps, that connection with sight and non-sight. Mm-hmm. Is that something that was at play in your thinking?
Yeah, I mean, I think It's not. It's probably really not apparent in my work, but I'm very inspired by Smithson, and I just can't believe this, that I always block on the name of this artist, pavilion maker.
Oh, Creon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like the Creon Room is just it's totally informed by his work, completely. And this usage of mirrors and opaqueness, and how you experience yourself in relation to architecture, and how you sort of, how the architecture becomes like a sort of a meter to the human body somehow.
But you also refer to them as paintings in your talk here.
Yeah. I never actually studied sculpture, and I never studied architecture, but I studied painting. And I think my relationship to painting is, I've always had sort of a kind of a conceptual and perhaps a little bit of an existential interest in painting, in the purpose of, in the function of painting. And even when I was in art school, I was thinking a lot about painting as a surface, and as a physical surface in relation to other physical surfaces. So after making three-dimensional works for a long time, it all of a sudden dawned upon me that all my three-dimensional works, they always have this flatness, and they always have this two-sidedness, and they always are representing one world on this side and another world on the other side, which I think is somehow akin to the way painting functions.
And that was very apparent in this work as well. People commented consistently that there was the internal aspect of this piece that was beautifully painted and refined, and with the combination of mirrors, and on the outside you had just the bare MDF, and presenting a scenographic take really on the exhibition. And then with the lighting as well, Katrin was very specific about how the pieces would be lit. And in fact, when we were packing up the work that we acquired, because we had to bring in a new installation into that gallery, Katrin was very specific about diagramming how the lighting should be, and the placement of the 82 panels when we reinstall it over the course of its life at the museum. And it was all very precisely spelled out for us, so that it could be presented always this way as that she intended.
You had like the lightnings.
Yeah.
And so, how did you come to the conclusion to have the lightnings on the borders, but not on the chandelier?
Yeah. Well, this room originally obviously doesn't have any electrical lighting, and it doesn't. The light in the original room is just the chandelier that hangs in the ceiling, and then there's one candlestick. And then, of course, this room is furnished differently in the museum than it was originally. This furniture didn't necessarily belong to this room, and I thought about a few different types of, few different ways of lighting the room. I think what I really wanted to create in the Creon Room was a light that really was without time. And it's actually very beautiful in the installation of these period rooms in the museum, specifically these rooms in the Reitzmann galleries. they are sort of they were sort of redone or redesigned a few years ago, and each room is sort of designed to evoke a certain time of day. So one room, for example, you look into it and it feels like an early morning light, and another room is perhaps mid-afternoon or late evening. And I really wanted to sort of take time out of the room, because of course light always is also a reference to time, to a specific time. And by using a light that was artificial but still in some way kind of neutral, and so a light that had no direction, that was as kind of just as diffused as possible, you kind of go away from an interpretation of a season or a time of day. So I really wanted the light to be kind of, not kind of a light on this planet somehow. And it was, again, often there are these sort of technical issues that come up when work is being fabricated, and then a technical solution ends up becoming somehow inherent in the meaning of the work. And I didn't necessarily, when I first started working with this idea, I didn't necessarily think, oh yes, I want there to be this sort of neutral timelessness, but then once I figured out how to light the room and how to project the light that I wanted into the space, then this idea of timelessness comes up, and a lot of people, by looking into particularly that room with the sort of emptiness in the mirrors, they felt that there was they just felt like this was a place with, actually kind of relates back to your question earlier, but this was somehow like a capsule with no time, kind of a capsule of death somehow, or like this completely enclosed, and that's just something that sort of happened. That's something that developed in the making of the work.
Maybe it's also because this is the first time you're working on a real scale. You're always, because your work is so much about scale, but this is like a real size.
Yeah.
That's the first time you're working.
Yeah, I mean there is a small reduction in scale in this room, and I think it's definitely not apparent in the photographs, but there's just a tiny tweak. But I mean, I often am using scale to kind of create this simultaneous kind of intrusion into a space, but a space that you somehow still can't enter. And I think one of the things that I feel like I really learned in this installation is how light can be used to create space, and how light in and of itself can actually create a barrier, and how just as the reduction in scale makes you somehow foreign to what you're entering into, I think the character of the light can actually function in the same way.
And the scale of that gallery, it has a very low ceiling. It's only 8 feet. Still not so good with meters, I'm afraid. But you can make
2.5 meters approximately
calculation. And we're consistently criticized for what some people feel is a quite inhospitable gallery. So in inviting Katrin to work, given her facility with scale, it was a challenge presented to her of transforming this banal, low-ceilinged, inhospitable space into something else. What could it be? And knowing her, again, her ability to play with scale, and a visitor's experience to one of her environments was part of the invitation to see what she could do, and ultimately very successfully with both of those spaces.
I was just wondering, it seems to me to be a very serene work of art, and I get words in my head like absence and void, and
say that again.
I get I'm thinking about like void and absence and the serenity of it all. Do you see this as somehow a spiritual work?
I would love to think of both of these works as spiritual. I mean, I think to me there's just no separation between the spiritual and anything else. I mean, everything is on some level spiritual, I think. And I think, I think especially with the Creon Room and maybe with the Cabris Room too, I think you have to ask yourself, what type of space and what type of time is it that you're looking into here? And I think that this place definitely can be related to our, sort of cultural narratives about cultural spiritual narratives, let's say, narratives or metaphors that come from our, spiritual history. And I think certainly, I feel like I've gotten that feedback from some people, and I'm really very happy about that. It's in my mind. There's not, that's something that I'm very, thankful for. If something spiritual is evoked in these works or by these works.
I'd like to ask Anne, now some of the projects that you showed us, the previous exhibitions, are site-specific. They take the museum on, especially Kara Walker, and you must have expected that she would do that, I think. How important is it for you to, as a curator, to select work or invite self-reflexivity on the museum?
Well, that's what has become at the core of this exhibition. So increasingly, that is what we're looking for, because we have the distinct perspective, being at a place like the Met with 5,000 years of history under its single roof, to give artists the opportunity and to invite them to reflect on that and to work within that context, as opposed to working in an environment that's specifically for contemporary art or deals with one or two centuries. So that is at the core of this program. Another venue that I work at fairly regularly, annually, is our roof garden program, and that again that's a particularly unique site that is set just at the tree level of Central Park, with the very dramatic backdrop of Manhattan beyond. And that has been very successful, where there has been the opportunity for artists, again, to do work in conversation with that very unique site. And so it gives me great pleasure, and it's such a privilege to work with artists who work in this context. Simultaneously, we'll have exhibitions that really don't necessarily relate to our holdings, but it is a specific opportunity that we can provide artists, and it's I think been very, very rewarding and very successful to date.
I mean, many people, I'm sure, in here have visited the Met at some point or another, but this is a museum that is not really like an institution, it's really like a world. It is so big. It is, I mean, like you were saying, you can fit many, 136 Kjarvalstaðir into this, which is wonderful for me to think about, because I spent so much time in Miklatún and Kjarvalsstaðir, have done my whole life. So, but you know, to go from one end of the museum to the next is it's more than 4 city blocks. It's
long and
then
too deep
equally
and
too deep. It's just, and I mean, what's the number of people that work in this institution? It's like, well,
it's over 2,000,
over
about 2,200 people.
And you have no sense of that you're actually working in an institution. It's just, it's like working in not even a town. It's just a universe.
And there are many different projects going on at a given time, and we do find often when working with artists who might be coming from working in a gallery. By that I mean a commercial gallery where they're having their show. In that instance, they're coming from the experience where everything is targeted to their show, and everybody's focused on that. Well, then we have an artist who's preparing for their show at the Met, but there are 20 other shows being coordinated at the same time, all drawing on the lighting designers and the exhibition designers and the people in the legal department who write the contracts and education, etc. So it has to all be very carefully, and the buildings department and the registrar, and bringing everything in, and so that everybody isn't crashing into each other all the time. And that's an explanation that we have with artists well in advance to prepare them for entering into this universe you describe, which is not single-minded. We're not focused on only one project at a time. It's many different ones, and that can be a challenge for an artist who is usually surrounded by a whole team for a gallery show specifically focused to them. So we in our department have to act as often a buffer to have things go as smoothly as they can, so we open on time without too much chaos and commotion.
Yeah, I mean, sort of at the same time I feel also like this was a project very much just between you and I, you know, and in a sense, you know, I mean, this was a long collaboration, and a very, you know, intimate one, I think, in many ways, which was very, and you know, I feel I'm just want to sort of say how thankful I am for having had an opportunity to do this and work on this with you.
Well, we were grateful as well, and so pleased and delighted, and there were surprises along the way at the outcome, and the greatest reward was being able to say that, you know, we'd really like to hang on to a representation of your work and acquire it for the museum. So that was a particularly splendid outcome of the endeavor.
And it must be the other side of this. You have this intimate collaboration in the context of this universe, but also must be overwhelming to have it on your shoulder. This is not only a very big building; it's full of masterpieces. I mean, it is the place where you go see. It's incredible work, and also truth about the modern art, whole things that I know of. How do you survive that?
Very well, thank you. Very well. But I think, I mean, yeah, I mean, but I think I tried to. I think I tried to respond to that in sort of in the work itself by somehow sort of deflecting the deflecting the attention from me and back over to the collection, back over to the work, over to the masterpieces that are in the museum.